In this video, I want to take us for a quick review of the course and also give you a bit of an outline to help you with your exam preparation. Let's look at the course now as it presents on Moodle. Okay, what we have is what is really a fairly general introduction to the whole area of valuation. What that means is we're taking you through two major interrelated fields, and that is the practical business of valuing property and producing a professional report, and you've already done that through your assignment and the report that you've prepared. So that's one side. Now within that there is the need to understand how the approaches to valuation work, what their various strengths and weaknesses are, and how and when to apply them. So that's really getting us into theory, and this brings us into the second part of what the course is doing. So the first part of the course is how to do a valuation and how to write a report. And as I say, that's largely covered in the assignment. However, when we look into the theory side, we find that we've gone through a fair bit of theory in the course, and it might have driven some of you a little bit batty having to read all of the study guides and the Whipple textbook and so on. But it's very important that you get a good feel for where value comes from in real estate and how you're able to capture that value in your valuation. And a little bit of an aside aspect there, it is a minor issue but still an important one, and that is whether what you do in producing a valuation really does give your client an understanding of the value of the property and not simply predict the price that it's going to earn if it's sold in the next few months with a willing buyer, willing seller and all that sort of stuff. So, what do you need to take away from the course? Well, you need the practical skills. Okay, we've already done that. But let's look now a little bit more at what other things you need as a university graduate, not simply a technician. A technician can be taught how to fill out a pro forma, field notes, and maybe put together a report. But a university graduate has to understand a bit more than that. They have to understand, first of all, the mathematics of the various approaches. Now, going through the assignments, or at least as much of the assignments that I've gone through right now, which is basically assignment 1B, what I've noticed is that there is a bit of a range in the class between the students who have done really well with your mathematical analysis of the sales, and that's primarily at this level, the mathematical analysis of the comparisons with adjustment grids and working out adjustments for different factors and so on. And the other side is the mathematics of the cost approach. Now, the cost approach has a particular logic to it, and the logic really works from, first of all, the idea that land value you don't work out by cost. It's really the residual. But the cost is entirely looking at the substantial improvements on the property, in this case a residential property, and the substantial improvements are the buildings. And so you'll notice that we simply take out things like fencing and landscaping and other minor improvements because they're only small amounts and they're relatively minor. But in the cost approach you have to understand why we're working out depreciation, how that sort of fits together with working out the depreciated value of the major improvements, and then really patching that together with the land value to get an alternate way or alternate approach to giving you the value. Incidentally, in some cases the cost approach is also referred to as the summation approach, and that is because it's really the sum of the costs or values in the various parts. Okay, so that's the mathematics. There's the third approach, or the third mathematical approach, which has to do with the income approach. Now, we're not really hitting that very hard in this course, but it's important that you understand the mathematics of what's presented in Module 10 even though we tend not to use that for residential valuations. So there are really three areas of mathematics that are important. The mathematics of the adjustments for the comparables to take account of whether one's got air conditioning, the other one doesn't, and that sort of thing. You've already seen how that is done, and I think most of you are on top of that. There's the mathematics of the cost or summation approach, which has to do with working out depreciation amounts, isolating the major improvements, and so on. And then there's the mathematics of the income approach that, as I said, is important for you to be on top of. It wasn't required in the assignment, and it's not a major aspect of residential valuation. However, it's going to be the major approach which you're going to be using later on when you do advanced and specialised valuation. So it's important that you also have your head around that. The nice thing is that the income approach is actually the easiest mathematics of the three. And in many ways it's the most powerful, so it ticks a number of boxes. Although we're going to really confuse the issue later on when we get into more advanced courses by introducing a thing called discounted cash flow analysis. However, we won't talk about that further here. Okay, I think you should get the impression that being on top of your mathematics is pretty important, and while that is evident in the assignment, it's also an area which may be examined in the examination, and it's certainly something that you should have a good grasp of and be able to demonstrate your mastery of, because that is extremely important for a valuer. Then we move to the pure theory. Okay, we've looked at a number of theoretical issues. We've got you to think very much about the meaning of value, and so we've got you to look at the definitions of value that you find from the API and the IVSC. And we've really picked those apart word by word, and some of you may have found that a bit torturous and arcane. However, it is important because it starts to get us thinking about the way that value and price are in fact a bit more difficult to put your finger on than first appears. And after all, you're going to go out in the community as specialist valuers. So you really need to have a better idea of what value means, because that's basically your stock in trade. And so I apologise for those of you who have found that it's rather torturous going through the comparisons between the definition in the IVSC versus somebody else and all the rest of it. But you really need to have turned that over in your minds, and reading through it is considered to be a good way of doing that. You also need to be up to speed to a certain extent with the Spencer case, because especially for Australia, the Spencer case and the determinations of the learned justices, especially Isaacs, but really the others as well, is important for you to be able to really get a grasp of what value is understood to be, at least in terms of the psychology of it, really. Because when we're talking about the willing seller, willing buyer, we're talking about psychological issues, not economic ones as such, per se. Now, behind that question of what value is when we get more into the economics. The valuer looks at the psychology of the market. The economist actually looks at the stuff of value. And we really need to do battle with a certain amount of that. Again, because you're going to go into the world armed with this course and others in your property studies as experts in value on the ground, in reality, not in some sort of lofty economic theory, but actually how the theory hits the dirt and actually turns into what is the most important investment for most people in their lives. And so we've taken you through some of the issues about value and the market and supply and demand. Now, for some of you, especially if you've done economics before or at school or what have you, you'll probably get to the stage where you're thoroughly sick of supply and demand. And I can understand that. While it's kind of obvious and easy and kind of nice in some ways, it really doesn't tell you a great deal. And so in the course we've had a couple of modules where we've got you to think about these things, about the notion of the perfect market, and also the way that the perfect market leaves us in a bit of a quandary when it comes to applying it to real estate, to land. You're going to be real estate valuers. And again, these things, if we're going to take any bit of theory, real estate value, the question of how the perfect market gives us the land value is something that you should have a fairly well developed position on. And so we have approached that from a number of different perspectives, and some of you might find the variety of perspectives that have been presented a bit confusing. However, it's important to look at things from more than one perspective, get both sides of the argument, what we often say, and then you've got to come to a determination. And we've given you a number of theorists to look at and think about, particularly Ricardo. Okay, so that's taken us through the course as it's presented. Hopefully you'll be able to step back as you get your study and your exam preparation together, and hopefully some pennies will drop and you'll step back and say, aha, that's what they're trying to teach us. And you may have found this already in your courses, but really at that point you've mastered the course. Once you understand what we're trying to get you to learn and the perspective we're hoping for you to arrive at, and also the familiarity with these arguments, because these are arguments that are very live, some of them, especially these essential arguments about value and how to estimate it as a valuer, are things that we are still arguing about and debating about and trying to develop in the discipline. And that, unfortunately, is not very satisfying, because you would like to come along and maybe learn something, the equivalent of the multiplication tables, where everything's set and dried and people have been doing it for centuries. Whereas what you found is that property value is a relatively recent activity, certainly in Western culture. Go back 1,000 years and we didn't have property valuers. And some of the issues are still live. And so it is unfortunate that we do have different perspectives, different theories and so on, and it's up to you to be aware of the arguments on both sides. We don't go too much in detail into that in this course, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But I would recommend that you give some thought to the meaning of value, the operation of the free market, and especially Ricardo's contribution to the question of where land gets its value from. You'll find those very, very useful as you go through the rest of your studies, and especially your professional career as you work in the property field. Now, a couple of you have asked for a little bit more detail about what the exam is going to look like. And so to do that, I'm going to give you a look at what the exam looks like. Unfortunately, I can't give you a clear look at what the questions are, but I can give you a general idea of what you're going to find in the exam so that it won't be a surprise or a shock when you move in. Okay, the exam is going to be in two parts. The first part is going to have some mathematics. Now, I've already gone through the places where the mathematics hits you in the course. So you've got to work that out. And so there will be some mathematical analysis, so you need to bring in a calculator. Some of you might like a financial calculator. However, I suspect that you really only need a $5 calculator from Woolies or something to do the equations which are in this course. And you will have to do some of them. So for those of you who are mathematically challenged, give some thought to being very, very familiar with the kind of mathematical analysis that was in your report and in the other approaches that we didn't use. I can't tell you which ones are in the exam, of course. However, if you go in confident that you understand the mechanics of valuation mathematics, then you will find Part A a walk in the park. Then we move to Part B. Part B consists of a number of short essay questions. Now, the nice thing about short essay questions is that, in general, they deal with big topics with a certain amount of generality. If the second part of the exam was 50 or 60 1 or 5 mark questions which ask you for the definition of that and a short response to this and something else, you would have a lot more work to do. When we're looking at short essay questions, what it means is that each question is going to ask you to explain or contrast or in somehow show your general understanding of a general topic. Now, obviously these are not going to do with the mathematical stuff, and so you can look at the theory issues that are through the course, and we've already talked about those to a certain extent. To do well in the short essay questions, you can look at what grade you want, and that to a certain extent gives you an idea of how much work to do and, what to fret over to a certain extent. Basically, to pass in any one of these short essay answers is really to have done little more than to have read the textbook and the study guide. Some of you might even be able to get through with just reading the study guide, I guess, but it might be a little bit risky. And only have a general understanding of the topic at hand. And so with a general understanding of the topic at hand, with a minimum of reading, you should get a pass. For those of you who want a credit or a distinction, you'll have to show a better understanding without significant errors, and with evidence that you've gone over the resources that we've really asked you to go through, and that is basically the study guide and the text, and in some cases a reading or two. Although for a credit and really moving into distinction, you really only need a general familiarity with that sort of tertiary reading. Okay, the primary thing that you really must do is have read the study guide and understood it, read the text. Unfortunately, sometimes the text is a little bit deep, but at least to have a good understanding and be able to put forth a fairly crisp presentation of your answer to the various questions that you attack. So, having read all the resources and be able to put a crisp answer to the questions will get you a credit or a distinction. If you want the very best grades, and so that's really high distinction or possibly the top end of the distinction area, you really want to demonstrate that you have a solid mastery of the topic, are able to present it crisply, so you have time limitations and space limitations obviously in an exam, so you need to be able to put your point forward nicely and crisply, impress your examiner, and for the highest results, not only should you have read at least all of the materials that are recommended in the course, but also have evidence of those readings, especially the tertiary readings. So be able to bring out a quote from maybe a journal article that was in the readings for whatever module is appropriate, or maybe some other reading that you may have done. Bring out a quote, maybe refer to an author. David Ricardo says such and such in 1817 or whatever. That sort of thing will earn you the high distinction. The high distinction, you wouldn't have any faults, any errors in your work and so on. I invite you all to aim for at least a credit. I don't think that's beyond anyone's ability. However, it's a matter of how much time you have put in so far and want to put in between now and then to get that reading done, and then to grapple with the issues. And to do that, I do recommend that you hit the discussion board. If you want to be the first one off the block to maybe start a discussion thread on what does the perfect market contribute to property valuation, or is the cost approach really crazy? By all means do that, because it's a good way, especially in our remote environment, of being able to get some kind of head scratching going on where you can talk to each other, think about different people's perspectives, kind of brush up each other's or polish up each other's understanding and so on, and sort of learn by that kind of interaction. And I do recommend that very highly, and that's really what the discussion board is there. Use the general discussion area. Don't use the Q&A or the news, because that really demands my attention. And for this sort of stuff, generally it's some of this is best done amongst the students themselves. Okay, I won't go on any further. I hope this gives you a bit more confidence in terms of how to revise for the exam and how to hit the exam when it happens. As I say, I'm confident that all of you should be able to get at least a pass grade all the way through here from simply doing the theory notes, the study guide, and of course you've got the higher grades available for people who have got the time and the interest to really shake this course for all it's worth and get everything out that you can. Good luck with the exam. I probably shouldn't wish you good luck, but rather all the best for the exam. I'm always here to take questions and so on, and I do hope you've enjoyed the course.